The folding chair had arrived 3 weeks late. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into the council chamber for the very first time. Every other species had seats that were carved, bolted, grown, or crystallized directly into the tiered gallery of that enormous room. The KTH Dominion had thrones of compressed, dark matter that hummed at a frequency you felt in your back teeth. The Fanny delegation sat on something that looked like frozen smoke and somehow held their weight. The Orisi had what appeared to be living coral formations shaped to cradle their four-part spinal columns. And then there was me, Yale Marsh, ambassador of Earth, sitting in a chair that the council's logistics department had shipped separately in a crate labeled supplementary furnishing, minor delegation, which had been held up at the station's intake dock because no one had thought to assign Earth a dock number. They gave us one eventually. Dock 119C. The same dock used for supply shipments and maintenance equipment. I sat in my chair, and I did not let my face do anything at all. The chamber itself was built inside a hollowed moon. That is not a metaphor. The Galactic Council had taken an actual moon, emptied it over the course of about 2 centuries, smoothed the interior into a perfect sphere, and then carved 7 kilometers of tiered seating into the inner walls. The ceiling was the moon's far side, which they had thinned to translucency so that starlight came through in long, pale columns. It was, I will admit, one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen in my life. It was also designed in every structural and procedural detail to make certain species feel like furniture. There were 41 member species in the Galactic Council. At that point, humanity had been admitted 14 months earlier, after a review process that had taken 22 years and required 3 separate votes, because the first 2 were deemed procedurally insufficient. The admission had passed on the 3rd vote by a margin of 2. I had read the transcript of that vote on the transport ride over. The debate had lasted 9 hours. A delegate from the Orisi Continuum had argued that humanity's pattern of resource overconsumption relative to technological maturity was a structural risk to galactic stability. The KTH advocate had seconded that concern. They had admitted us anyway, not because they believed in us, because the vote math worked out and there was a procedural deadline they did not want to miss. I knew all of this before I sat down in my late-arriving chair. My protocol handler was a Fanny named Essel. The Fanny were tall, narrow-shouldered creatures with semi-translucent skin through which you could see the faint movement of their circulatory system, pale blue and slow. They communicated in 2 registers simultaneously, spoken language, and a complex system of fin movements along their jaw and collar that carried emotional and tonal content the spoken words left out. Learning to read the fins was not part of any standard diplomatic training package. I had spent 4 months learning anyway. Essel found me in the gallery corridor before the first session opened. His fins moved in a slow, flattened pattern I had catalogued as bureaucratic resignation, the Fanny equivalent of someone sighing before they explained something obvious to someone who did not expect to understand it. Ambassador Akimarsh, he said, I have been assigned to assist your delegation with procedural orientation. I appreciate that, I said. The Council operates on a seniority-weighted participation model. Species admitted within the last 50 years are extended observer status, with limited floor access. You may submit written queries through the Tier 4 filing system. Response times average between 30 and 90 standard days. And verbal participation? The fins shifted. Something between amusement and pity. You will not be addressed in session. It is not protocol. I understand the protocol, I said. He looked at me for a moment with the particular stillness of someone who has just realized the person they're talking to did not find that discouraging and is not sure what to do with that. The first session begins in 40 minutes. The primary item on the agenda is a resource reallocation bill submitted by the KTH Dominion. He handed me a data tablet and walked away. The fins, as he turned, made a movement I had not catalogued before, something small and quick. I filed it away. I sat back down in my chair and opened the bill. It was 412 pages long. The KTH Dominion's Resource Realignment and Sustainable Development Act, Version 7, Revision 4. The language was dense, careful, and precise in the way that very well-designed traps are precise. On the surface, it was an environmental management framework. It cited 17 geological surveys for pangalactic ecological indices and a landmark ruling from 340 years ago that had established mineral extraction quotas in the outer belt regions. On the surface, I read it straight through. The session started. Speakers rose and spoke in languages my earpiece translated with a half-second delay. I kept reading. My coffee went cold. A KTH delegate delivered a 40-minute presentation with holographic mapping overlays that made the bill look like conservation work. I kept reading. The chamber around me voted on a secondary agenda item. Voted again. The light through the thinned ceiling shifted as the station moved through its orbital position. My coffee was cold enough now that I stopped noticing it was there. And then I found it. Subsection 7, Appendix C, footnote 19. It was 11 lines long. It was written in a subordinate clause construction that made it read like an administrative clarification rather than a substantive provision. It redefined the threshold criteria for biological sustainability review in a way that quietly, technically, and completely legally excluded any species admitted within the last 30 standard years from the asteroid belt claim protections that the main body of the bill was pretending to guarantee. 4 species fell inside that window. Earth was one of them. I closed the data tablet. I set it down on my knee with care. The chamber continued around me, enormous and humming with the procedural machinery of 41 civilizations that had been doing this for longer than humanity had had written language. I looked at my cold coffee. Then I looked at the 11 lines again. I had come here expecting to be furniture. That was fine. Furniture could be moved. Furniture could be rearranged. Furniture, if you were paying attention, told you everything about how a room was designed to work and who it was designed to work for. I had 412 pages of information. Now I had one footnote that mattered. I had a session schedule showing the bill was moving to final vote in 9 days. 9 days was enough. I picked up my coffee, cold as it was, and drank it anyway. Then I opened a new file on my tablet and started writing. The chair was late. The dock number was borrowed from a maintenance bay. The vote that let us in had passed by 2. I had read every word of a 412-page document in a room where no one expected me to speak. 9 days. I started writing. The first thing I did the next morning was attend a subcommittee session that had nothing to do with the KTH bill. Essel found me there during the recess interval, standing in the back row of a gallery that held maybe 30 delegates and had clearly not expected a human in it at any point. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has shown up to a party that was not for them and does not seem to know that. This is the Infrastructure Subcommittee on Interbelt Transit Corridors, he said. I know, I said. It is not relevant to Earth's current procedural standing. I'm curious about the process, I said. The Finns did the thing I had begun privately calling the resigned flutter. He left. I stayed. I attended 4 more sessions that day. A resource classification hearing. A dispute arbitration preliminary. A procedural review committee that spent 3 hours discussing the proper formatting requirements for Tier 2 filings. I took notes on all of it, not because any of it was directly useful, but because I was starting to understand that the Council's power did not live in its votes. It lived in its procedures. And procedures, unlike power, could be learned. That night, I sent a message back to my analyst on Earth, a man named Colin Adler, who had been working interstellar policy for 11 years and who communicated almost entirely in 3 accurate sentences. The message read, I need everything we have on the Council's founding charter. Original text. Every available translation cross-referenced against current standing rules. His reply came back 6 hours later, accounting for transmission delay. That document is 4,000 years old and has never been formally translated into any post-century 30 admission language because the Council has never provided one. I know, I wrote back. Send what exists. Another 6 hours. Then sending. Also, are you sleeping? I looked at my open files. There were 17 of them. I had color-coded the subsections of the KTH bill into 4 different categories. I had a running document of procedural cross-references that had grown to 31 pages. My bunk light was still on. Enough, I wrote back. Which was not entirely accurate, but was accurate enough. The founding charter arrived in fragments. Partial translations done by 3 different academic institutions over 4 centuries. none of them complete, none of them agreeing on certain key passages, several of them flagging sections that had been deliberately left untranslated in the official council archives. That last detail I filed very carefully. Deliberately left untranslated, in a document that was still the binding legal framework for every rule the council had ever written. I started with the sections that had been translated, cross-referenced them against current standing rules, built a map of what the current rules cited versus what the founding charter actually said. There were gaps, not errors, exactly. More like rooms in a house that had been quietly sealed off and painted over. You would only notice if you were looking for the original floor plan. I was looking for the original floor plan. On day 3, Colin sent another message without my asking. I showed your cross-reference document to our senior legal advisor. She said, and I am quoting directly, "This is the most aggressively organized act of legal research I have seen in 30 years of practice." She also said you should sleep. I sent back a single word. Later. By day 5, I had identified the mechanism. Statute 7 of the Founding Charter. It had never been cited in any session in recorded council history, at least not in any session whose transcript was publicly available. It existed in the original text. It was referenced in 2 of the 3 partial translations. It had been quietly excluded from the Standing Rules Index that new member species received upon admission. You had to know to look for it. You had to know what you were looking for when you found it. Any signatory species may invoke a full charter compliance review before any bill affecting biological sustainability reaches final vote. During the review period, the bill is frozen. The review cannot be waived by procedural countermotion without a unanimous founding member vote, which had not happened in the Council's entire history because the founding members had not agreed unanimously on anything since the original signing. The KTH had helped write that clause. Back when they were the emerging species. Back when the old powers of that era had been trying to do to them exactly what they were now doing to 4 smaller species through 11 lines in a footnote. They had written the lock. They had forgotten they wrote it. Or they had assumed no one new would ever find it. I filed the invocation form on day 6. The form number was so old that the Council's digital filing system initially returned an error message stating that the form type was not recognized. I sent a written inquiry to the administrative office. The response came back 18 hours later from a junior Vanny clerk who had apparently needed to contact 3 separate archive departments to confirm that yes, the form was real, and yes, the system would accept it, and could I please resubmit with a legacy document header. I resubmitted with the legacy document header. The system accepted it. The filing confirmation arrived with no flags, no alerts, no notifications sent to any senior council official. It sat in a processing queue managed by a clerk who was on ceremonial leave. The queue was not monitored by anyone else. I told Colin. His reply, "How long until someone notices?" My reply, Session 44. When I stand up. 3 days of silence from his end. Then Yale. Are you sure about this? I looked at my 17 files. I looked at the form confirmation sitting in my inbox. I looked at footnote 19 of the KTH bill, which I had by that point memorized well enough to recite in the dark. No, I wrote back. But I'm doing it anyway. He did not respond to that, which from Colin was the same as a very long and complicated answer. I closed my files. I set an alarm. I slept for 6 hours, which was the most I had managed in 5 days. And in the morning, I pressed my good jacket and ate a full breakfast and walked back to the chamber where my folding chair was waiting for me. 2 days left. I was ready. Session 44 opened at the second standard hour. The chamber was at less than half capacity. I had expected that. Final vote sessions on administrative bills rarely drew full attendance from senior delegations. The species with the most power sent junior representatives, because why spend senior delegates' time on a foregone conclusion? The KTH had sent their third-tier advocate. The OREC had sent 2 junior delegates who had been deep in a side conversation when they walked in and had not stopped talking since. The Vanny senior delegate was present, but had the body language of someone completing a formality before a longer meeting elsewhere. The first item on the agenda was a transit corridor naming dispute that took 40 minutes and resolved without incident. Then the presiding officer, Elder Oren of the Fanny founding delegation, called the second item. The KTH Resource Realignment Act, Version 7, Revision 4. Final vote. I stood up. The room did not go quiet immediately. It took about 3 seconds for the people nearest to me to register what was happening and pass that registration outward through the chamber, like a slow ripple. Oren looked at me with the expression of someone who has encountered a procedural situation they were not briefed on and is deciding in real time how to respond. The chair recognizes. He paused, clearly checking his notes for a name he had never expected to say. The delegate from Earth. I had practiced the pronunciation of Statute 7's invocation language from the original founding charter text for 2 days. My accent was almost certainly terrible. I said the words anyway, clearly, at a pace that did not rush or stumble. Clarity mattered more than elegance. And I knew exactly what I was saying, even if the room was not yet sure they had heard it correctly. Statute 7. Full review. The chamber went silent. Not the quiet of a room waiting for a speaker to continue. The quiet of a room that has just heard something it did not think was possible. The KTH third-tier advocate turned around in his seat. His species communicated emotional state through color shifts in their outer membrane, and his had gone from their standard dark gray to something I can only describe as the color of a thunderstorm that has just realized it is indoors. Objection, he said. The reference statute has not been active in standing practice for over 800 standard years. Invocation requires demonstrated relevance under current procedural guidelines. Section 14, subsection 3. He cited it smoothly. I had read Section 14, subsection 3 11 times. Section 14, subsection 3 applies to statutes introduced after the Charter ratification date, I said. Statute 7 predates it. Under the Charter's own hierarchy clause, original statutes are not subject to amendment procedures applied to post-ratification rules. They stand unless removed by unanimous founding member vote. The last unanimous founding member vote had been at the original signing. I did not say that out loud. I did not need to. The KTH advocate cited a second precedent. I cited back. He cited a third. I had read that one too. Oren called a 10-minute recess after the 7th exchange. That was the first time in the Council's observable history that a Tier 4 minor species delegate had held a floor argument past the second citation. In the recess corridor, the light was cooler and the acoustics were flatter. I could hear my own heartbeat in a way I could not in the chamber. I stood near the far wall, drank water, and looked at nothing in particular. The KTH advocate crossed the corridor toward me alone. No legal team, no aides. He stopped a reasonable distance away and looked at me with something I had not seen from any KTH representative in any session I had attended. How long, he said, did you spend preparing this? It was not an aggressive question. It was a real one. 14 days, I said. He was quiet. The membrane shifted through a slow sequence I did not have a reference for. Not thunderstorm, not the formal gray. Something in between. No member species, he said finally, has ever invoked that statute. I know, I said. It was not in your admission materials.
No.
Then how did you find it? I looked at him for a moment. He was the third-tier advocate, not the lead. He had been sent here because this was supposed to be a formality. He had shown up expecting a vote and gotten something else entirely. He was asking me a genuine question in an empty corridor because something about the situation had stripped the performance out of him. I read everything, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he went back into the chamber without another word. The recess ended. The arguments resumed. By the time Oren called the session close, the KTH bill was frozen, pending a full charter compliance review that would take at least 60 standard days. The vote did not happen. I walked back to my late-arriving chair, sat down, and put my hands in my lap where no one could see them shaking. The compliance review took 83 days. I spent most of them in the archive wing of the station, a place that smelled of filtered air and something faintly metallic, where the physical records of 4,000 years of council proceedings were stored in formats ranging from crystalline data lattices to handwritten documents sealed in atmospheric preservation cases. I had requested access on day 2 of my posting and had been told access was available to all member delegations. No one had ever specified that minor status delegations were excluded, possibly because no minor status delegation had ever asked. Colin sent me a message on day 12 of the review. 3 other species have filed procedural objections to unrelated bills in the last week using the same statute. I wrote back, I know. I did know. Essel had told me in his way, by arriving at the archive wing on day 10 with a secondary data tablet and sitting 3 seats away from me, without speaking. Fanny Protocol made direct acknowledgement of an action they found significant into something they communicated through proximity instead. He sat with me for 2 hours. Then he left. The fins as he walked out made the movement I had seen twice before and had by then catalogued. He had not expected me. On day 40, the KTH lead advocate, the actual lead this time, not the third tier, requested a formal meeting through the proper tier 4 filing channels. Response time on my queries was supposed to average 30 to 90 days. His request came back approved in 6 hours. We met in a conference room that was neutral space. Neither KTH nor Fanny design, just a table, chairs, and the ambient hum of the station's environmental systems. He was larger than the third-tier advocate, older, and the color shifts in his membrane were controlled in the way that long practice makes controlled. You could still read them if you knew how to look. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. I want to understand something, he said. Not as a procedural matter. As a question between delegates. Ask it, I said. The clause you invoked. You know its origin. Yes. You know who wrote it. Yes. He watched me. The membrane held a slow, dark color I had come to associate with KTH formality, but underneath it, something moved, small, harder to name. We wrote it to protect ourselves, he said. I know that too, I said. And you used it against us. I looked at him for a moment. I used it to protect 4 species whose sustainability claims were being removed through language buried in a footnote. One of those species is mine, but the other 3 aren't. He was quiet. Your species has been a member for 14 months, he said. 13 months and 29 days, I said. But the charter doesn't have a residency requirement for statute invocation. Any signatory species. That's what it says. Another silence. The membrane shifted. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at me. The bill will not pass as written, he said. The KTH Dominion is prepared to submit a revised version that removes the contested provisions from the footnote. I waited. In exchange, the compliance review is withdrawn, and no further charter-based challenges are filed against KTH legislative items for a period of 20 standard years. I had expected something like this. I had also prepared for something like this. The compliance review cannot be withdrawn by the invoking party alone under the statute, I said. It requires a procedural close motion that goes back to the full chamber. I can support that motion. I cannot guarantee others will. Because by that point, I could not guarantee that the 3 species who had filed their own objections had their own timelines, their own reasons, and their own relationship to the founding charter that was no longer mine to manage. He looked at me. You understand what you have started? It was not hostile. It was something closer to honest. I understand what 14 months of reading started, I said. He stood. He straightened his formal outer layer and looked at me one more time. The membrane did something I had never seen a KTH membrane do in a formal setting. It went, for just a moment, entirely still. No performance. No diplomacy. Just a long, level look from a species that had been powerful for a very long time, watching something change in front of them. Then he left. The room was quiet. I sat at the table alone for a few minutes before I went back to the archive. 83 days. Then came Session 79. The revised KTH bill, stripped of footnote 19 and its 11 lines, was scheduled for final vote. The chamber was at full capacity for the first time since I had arrived. Every senior delegate present. Every seat filled. The KTH took their dark matter thrones. The Orisi took their coral formations. The Fanny senior delegate was in his primary seat, not attending to other business elsewhere. I took my chair. The vote passed. The asteroid belt claims for all 4 emerging species were preserved. Oren closed the session with the standard procedural language he had used to close every session I had attended. Nothing in his tone was different. Nothing in the chamber's official record marked that session as anything other than a routine administrative vote. But the chamber, as it emptied, felt different. Not louder, not more celebratory. Different in the way a room feels when the furniture has been rearranged, and you cannot immediately identify which piece moved, but you know something has. I gathered my things. I folded my notes. I looked at my chair, which had arrived late in a crate labeled supplementary furnishing, and thought about the dock number borrowed from a maintenance bay, and the vote that had passed by 2 and 14 months of everyone in this room assuming I had nothing to say. Then I walked out into the corridor and called Colin. He picked up after one ring, which meant he had been waiting. "Well," he said. "Well," I said. A pause. Then, in the tone of a man who had spent 11 years in interstellar policy and had learned to keep his voice level for most things, "Yale, you understand this changes things." "That's the idea," I said. He was quiet for a moment. The 3 species who filed parallel objections want to request a meeting. "I know. Set it up." Another pause. The Fanny senior delegate submitted a formal inquiry to the administrative office this morning asking whether the Charter's founding language archive has a public access policy for member delegations. I stopped walking. He submitted it himself? Senior delegate. Not through a junior staffer. His personal filing signature. I stood in the corridor and looked at nothing. The station hummed around me. The light through distant viewports was the pale blue-white of starlight filtered through reinforced materials. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay," Colin said. "And Yale? Please sleep." "I will," I said. And this time I meant it. 6 months after Session 44, my formal posting review came through. The Council's administrative office had created a new role. It had a title that ran to 47 words in standard Galactic Common and translated into English as something roughly approximating founding Charter Compliance and Member Equity Officer, which was either a promotion or a polite way of putting me in a room where they could watch me. Possibly both. I accepted it. My new chair was bolted to the floor. No one made an announcement about that. No memo was circulated. One morning I came into the chamber and the folding chair was gone, and a fixed installation was in its place, flush with the gallery floor, labeled with Earth's delegation marker in the same style as every other senior seat in the chamber. Essel was in the corridor when I arrived that morning. He looked at me. His fins made the movement I now knew well, the one I had catalogued on day 1 and spent weeks identifying. The Fanny expression for "I did not expect you." "Essel," I said. "Thank you for everything." He looked at the middle distance for a moment in the way Fanny do when they are deciding how much of an emotional response is appropriate. Then his fins moved again, something smaller, quicker, something I had not catalogued before, but understood anyway. "I think it meant I'm glad I was wrong about you." He walked away before I had to find words for it. I was grateful for that. That evening, I called home for the first time in 3 weeks. My mother answered from the kitchen. I could hear the particular sounds of our house behind her, the fan above the stove, the neighbor's radio through the window, the creak of the particular floorboard just inside the back door. "How is it going?" she said. "The big important space meetings?" "Mostly paperwork," I said. "How is everything there?" "Fine, fine.
Your cousin got a new job."
"Your uncle is arguing with the landlord again." "Normal things." A pause. "Are you eating?" "Yes, Mama." "Proper food?" "Not those flat things in packets." "Mostly proper food." She made a sound that meant she did not entirely believe me but would let it go. "Come home soon. I'll make jollof." "I promise," I said. After we hung up, I sat in my quarters for a while and did not open any files. I thought about jollof rice and the sound of the neighbor's radio and the creak of the back door. Something in my chest that had been held at a specific tension for 6 months loosened in a way I had not realized I was waiting for.
Soon.
But not yet. There was one more thing I needed to do first. The new session was 3 days away. A different bill this time, submitted by the Orisi Continuum concerning atmospheric management rights over a cluster of pre-mission worlds. The language was careful and precise. And on page 287 of 391, It contained a provision that quietly reclassified 3 inhabited worlds as uninhabited for developmental purposes based on a population threshold that had been set specifically low enough to exclude the species currently living there. I had read it twice. The session opened on a clear day, station time. Full attendance again, which was becoming a pattern. I took my bolted-down seat and set my files in order and waited. Across the gallery, in the back row, I could see a delegate from a species whose name I had learned to pronounce over the past 2 weeks. They had been admitted to the council 8 months ago. Their seat was a temporary installation, bolted up from the gallery floor. From where I was sitting, I could see that they were holding a data tablet open to the ORESI bill, reading it the way I had read the KTH bill, with the kind of stillness that means you have stopped noticing the room around you. I watched them for a moment. Then I pulled my session notes from my file. My notes on the ORESI bill were thorough, carefully cross-referenced, including every statutory citation that would be relevant to a challenge under Statute 7 of the Founding Charter, including the correct pronunciation of the invocation language, which I had annotated phonetically in the margin. I made a second copy. I crossed the gallery during the opening procedural statements, when the room's attention was on Orin and a transit corridor dispute that opened the agenda. I set the second copy of my notes on the railing beside the new delegate's seat, without a word. They looked at the notes. Then they looked at me. I did not explain anything. I went back to my seat. Because some things you do not explain. You find the clause buried in the footnote. You learn the words. You stand up in the room where no one expects you to speak, and you speak anyway. And then, if you are paying attention, you look around and see who else in that room has been reading while everyone assumed they were just sitting quietly in a temporary chair. And you hand them the map. Session 79 had changed what the council's floor looked like. Not loudly. Not with announcements. Just the slow structural shift of a room where new people had started reading the original floor plan and finding all the sealed-off doors. I had not told that delegate what the 3 words meant, the invocation, the legal weight of them, the history of who wrote them and why. I had not explained any of it. She would find it the same way I had found it, alone in a room with a 4,000-year-old document and enough stubbornness to read until the thing that mattered showed itself. And then she would find her own 3 words. Because that was how it worked now. Orin called the second agenda item, the ORESI Atmospheric Management Bill. I opened my notes to page 1. The chamber hummed. From across the gallery, I saw the new delegate sit up straighter in her temporary chair. She was still holding the notes I had given her. Her hands were not shaking. Mine were not shaking either. Not anymore. I started reading. The ORESI bill did not reach a vote that session. Or the next one. Because the new delegate, her name was Ambassador Vess of the newly admitted Silurian Compact, stood up 15 minutes after I handed her my notes and invoked Statute 7 with a pronunciation so flawless that the KTH third-tier advocate actually turned around twice. Once to check who was speaking. Once to check if he had heard correctly. She spoke the 3 words, and the chamber froze again. Statute 7. Full review. The ORESI lead delegate objected. Vess cited back. The ORESI cited a precedent. Vess had read that one, too, because she had spent the previous night in the archive wing, the same way I had spent my nights, because I had left her the map, but she had walked the path herself. Orin called a recess. The chamber emptied. In the corridor, Vess found me standing near the same wall where the KTH advocate had found me months earlier. She was tall for her species, which made her roughly shoulder height to me, and her coloration was the pale silver of someone who had not slept enough. You knew, she said, that I would stand up. I knew you had read the bill, I said. The rest was you. She was quiet for a moment. Her species had a different way of processing silence than humans did. They let it sit, turn over, settle. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Our admission documents said we would have full standing in 50 years. Until then, we were to observe and learn. No one mentioned we could learn this. No one mentioned it to us either, I said. She looked at her notes, my notes, now covered in her own annotations in a language I could not read. There are other species in the back rows. Other temporary seats. How many of them have you given this to? I met her eyes. Enough. She understood what I did not say. Not because I had explained it, but because she was now part of it. The map was not a gift. It was a responsibility. And once you knew the door existed, you could not unknow it. The Orisi will revise their bill, she said. The way the KTH did. Probably. And then there will be another bill. And another. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment. Her species version of a smile was subtle, a slight shift in the silver of her face, like moonlight changing angle. This is not a game you are playing, she said. This is a very slow revolution. That's the best kind, I said. The kind no one notices until it's already finished. Oren called the session back to order. The Orisi bill was frozen pending compliance review. The vote did not happen. The chamber emptied. But this time, 3 delegates from 3 different minor species approached me in the corridor before I could leave. Not to ask questions. To introduce themselves. To let me know, in the careful language of diplomats who are not yet sure what they are allowed to say, that they had also been reading. I gave them copies of my notes. Not the full document, just the map, the statute, the pronunciation guide, the citation chain that led back to the original charter. I did not tell them what to do with it. I did not need to. That night, I sat in my quarters with the lights low and the station's hum filling the silence. Colin's voice came through the calm channel, tinny and familiar. You're building a coalition, he said. I'm handing out keys, I said. What they unlock is their choice. The council's senior members are going to notice. They're already noticing. The Vanny senior delegate didn't submit that archive inquiry because he was curious. He submitted it because he's worried. Good, I said. Worry is productive. Yale. Colin. We spent 22 years waiting for admission. We spent 14 months being furniture. We have a document that says any signatory species can invoke Statute 7, and we have 41 species in this chamber. Most of them have never been told about the door. I'm not going to be the one who keeps it shut. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your mother called the office. She said you haven't been answering your personal line. I closed my eyes. I'll call her tomorrow. You said that last week. I'll call her tonight. Good. A pause. And Yale? The Silurian ambassador is asking for another meeting. She wants to discuss something called the secondary implications of Statute 7 on resource arbitration. I think she found something in the archives you missed. I sat up straighter. What kind of something? She wouldn't say over comms. But she used the phrase unanimous founding member vote in a way that suggested she has questions about what it actually means if a founding member abstains. The station hummed around me. I thought about the founding charter, about the locked rooms I had found, and the ones I had not yet discovered. About a 4,000-year-old document that no one had read closely enough. Set up the meeting, I said. Tomorrow. Before session. Already did. She's bringing her own notes. I almost smiled. Of course she is. The next morning, I arrived at the archive wing before the lights came on automatically. Vess was already there, sitting at the same long table where I had spent my 83 days. She had spread her notes across the surface, pages and pages, cross-referenced and color-coded in a system I did not recognize, but immediately respected. You're early, she said without looking up. You're earlier. She slid a document across the table. Read Section 12 of the Founding Charter. The original language, not the translated version. I picked it up. The original text was dense, written in a diplomatic register that predated most of the Council's member species. But I had been reading old documents for months now. The patterns were familiar. You found it, I said. I found something. She pointed to a line halfway down the page. The standard interpretation says a unanimous founding member vote requires all 7 founding species to agree. But the original phrasing, the verb construction here, it's conditional. It doesn't say all. It says the founding members present and voting. I read it again. She was right. Do you know what that means? She asked. I looked up at her. It means if a founding member abstains, or if they're not present, the threshold changes. It means, Vess said quietly, that the lock the KTH wrote to protect themselves can be opened without their permission, if the other founding members are willing to let it happen. The archive wing was silent except for the hum of preservation fields and the distant shuffle of a maintenance drone. Outside, the station's artificial day cycle was beginning, light slowly filtering through the translucent ceiling of the chamber we would enter in 2 hours. How many of the founding members still attend sessions regularly? I asked. Vess already had the answer.
3.
The Fanny, the KTH, and the Orisi, the other 4 cent proxies for the last century. Their seats are filled by delegates who don't have voting authority on charter amendments. So they're present, but they're not voting. According to the Council's current rules, they're not counted as absent because their proxies fulfill attendance requirements. But according to the original charter, she tapped the document. A proxy is not a founding member. A proxy cannot cast a founding member vote. I sat back in my chair. The station hummed. Somewhere above us, 7 kilometers of tiered seating waited in the dark, and 41 species were preparing for another day of business, as usual. Vess, I said, how fast can you get this analysis to the other minor delegations? She looked at me. The silver of her face shifted into that moonlit smile. I already sent it, she said. 2 hours ago, while you were sleeping. I should have been annoyed. I was not. I was something else, something I had not felt since the moment I found footnote 19. Hope. We need to be careful, I said. If we move too fast. We have been waiting, Vess said quietly, for centuries. Not fast. Not anymore. We have been waiting, and now someone has finally opened the door. We are not going to hesitate because the room on the other side might be drafty. I looked at her. At this delegate from a species I had never heard of a month ago, sitting in a temporary chair, holding a map I had given her, already drawing new maps of her own. You're right, I said. Let's go. We walked out of the archive wing together. Behind us, the documents hummed in their preservation fields. Ahead of us, the chamber waited, and the 3 words that had frozen at once were about to be spoken again. By more than one voice this time. The session opened. The Orisi bill was still frozen, pending a review that would take months. But the Council's agenda had other items, minor things, administrative noise, the kind of procedural filler that kept the machinery turning. I sat in my bolted chair and watched the back rows.
There were more of them now.
Delegates from species admitted in the last 30 years. Species who had been given temporary seats and told to wait. They were not waiting anymore. Vess caught my eye from across the gallery. She gave a small nod, the kind that meant we are ready. I did not stand. I did not need to. Because the first invocation of the session came from a delegate I had never met, representing a species I could not name without checking my notes. She stood in the 3rd tier, her voice steady, her pronunciation of the ancient words carefully practiced. Statute 7. Full review. The bill she challenged was a minor resource allocation, nothing that would make headlines. But that was the point. She was not trying to stop a major piece of legislation. She was testing the mechanism, proving that the door opened for everyone, not just the species with bolted chairs. Oren called a recess. The chamber murmured. When we returned, the bill was frozen. The delegate sat down. Her hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. But her face was calm. She had done it. The first of many. 3 weeks later, the Fanny senior delegate requested a private meeting. Not through channels, personally, in the corridor, the way the KTH advocate had done months ago. He stood near the wall where I had taken my recesses, his fins moving in a pattern I had never seen before. Ambassador Okoymarsh, he said. You have been busy.
We have been reading, I said.
There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. The founding members are aware of what is happening. The KTH are concerned. The Orisi are alarmed. The Fanny are observing. Observing is good. Observing means you're not trying to stop it. His fins flattened, the Fanny equivalent of a dry smile. Stopping it would require a unanimous founding member vote. You know that. You also know that such a vote is impossible because the other 4 founding members have not sent voting delegates in centuries. I know, I said. What you may not know is that the KTH have been contacting those absent founding members. Quietly. Trying to secure their formal votes to amend the charter. My chest tightened. And 3 of the 4 have refused. Not because they support you, because they do not wish to be drawn back into council politics after so long away. The fourth is considering. Which one? He did not answer directly. Instead, he said, the founding member who wrote Statute 7 originally. The one who insisted on the present and voting clause. They remember why they wrote it. They are not sure they want it used against the KTH or for anyone else. I stood there, the station humming around us, and thought about 4,000-year-old politics. About a species who had once been where the Silurians were now, who had ridden a door to protect themselves and then watched that door get sealed shut by the very powers they had tried to balance. What do they want? I asked. Essel's fins moved again. They want to meet you. The meeting was arranged for the following week, not on the station, but on a neutral world halfway between council space and the absent founding members' territory. I traveled alone. Vess offered to come. I told her no. Some doors you walk through by yourself. The founding members' representative was old, older than anyone I had met in the council. His species had a name I could not pronounce, so he told me to call him First Witness. We sat in a room with no windows, on chairs that were neither bolted nor temporary, just chairs. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. You invoked our statute, he said. I did. You used it to protect species that are not your own. Yes. Why? I thought about the question. Not because I needed time to find an answer, because the answer deserved to be spoken carefully. Because the door was there, I said. And because no one else was opening it. He was quiet. Then he reached across the table and placed his hand, warm, dry, ancient, over mine. Then we will not stand in your way, he said. But we will not help you either. This is your revolution, ambassador, not ours. That's all I needed, I said. For you not to close the door again. I returned to the station the night before the next session. Vess was waiting in the docking bay, her silver coloration pale under the artificial lights. Well, she asked, they're not going to block us. She breathed out, a sound I had never heard her make, something between relief and determination. Then it's time, she said. For what? She handed me a document. It was a list. Every minor delegation in the council, every species admitted in the last 50 years, every temporary seat. Next to each name, a checkmark. 23 species, she said. 23 delegates who have read the charter, who have found the door, who are ready to speak. I looked at the list, then at her. When? Tomorrow. The first agenda item is a symbolic resolution, no real weight, but it requires a roll call vote. Every delegation will be recognized. Every delegation will have the floor. I understood. The 3 words. Vess nodded. All at once. Not one voice. 23. Let them try to freeze the chamber when the entire back row stands up together. The station hummed. Somewhere above us, the chamber waited. The moon hollowed out and smoothed, the starlight falling through the thinned ceiling, the ancient seats of power arranged in their perfect, unchanging order. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow, she agreed. The session opened. Oren called the first item, the symbolic resolution. The roll call began. Species after species, name after name. Most delegations said aye or nay or abstained in the usual ways. Then the first temporary seat rose. Statute 7. Full review. The chamber stirred. Then another seat. Another. 23 voices, speaking the same 3 words in 23 different accents, some practiced, some still learning, all of them clear. Oren's gavel did not fall. He stood at the podium, his fins utterly still for the first time I had ever seen. The KTH advocate turned slowly, his membranes cycling through colors I had no names for. The Orisi delegates ceased their side conversation. The Vanny senior delegate sat forward in his frozen smoke seat. The chamber, the ancient, enormous, beautiful chamber built inside a hollowed moon, went silent. Not the silence of a room waiting for a speaker. The silence of a room that has just realized it is no longer the same room it was yesterday. I sat in my bolted chair and watched. I did not stand. I did not need to. The door was open and 23 species were walking through it. Oren finally spoke. His voice, for the first time, carried something other than procedural calm. It carried, I think, wonder. The chair recognizes the delegation from the Silurian Compact. Ambassador Vess, you have the floor. Vess stood. She looked across the chamber, at the Kadach thrones, the Orisi corals, the frozen smoke of the Thani. At the back rows where temporary seats had become something else entirely. She said, "We have been reading. We would like to propose an amendment to the standing rules. One that makes Statute 7 part of the standard admission materials for every new species. One that ensures no delegation ever again sits in a temporary chair without knowing the door exists." The chamber was silent. Then, from the KTH delegation, the lead advocate stood. He did not object. He did not cite precedent. He said, seconded. Oren's gavel fell. The vote was scheduled. And the room, the old room, the hollowed moon, the seat of 41 species, began, slowly, to rearrange its furniture. I sat back in my bolted chair. My coffee was cold. I drank it anyway. Somewhere behind me, in the back row, a delegate from a species admitted 3 months ago was already reading the charter. Her temporary chair creaked when she shifted her weight. She did not notice. She was too busy finding the door. The vote passed. Not unanimously. Nothing in the council ever passed unanimously. But it passed. Statute 7 became part of the standard admission materials. Every new species from that day forward would receive the full founding charter. Every new delegation would know about the door. The old powers did not fall. That was not the point. The KTH still had their dark matter thrones. The Orisi still had their coral formations. The Thani still sat on frozen smoke. But the back rows were different now. The temporary seats had become something else. Not permanent, not yet, but no longer invisible. I stayed on the station for another year. My title, Founding Charter Compliance and Member Equity Officer, turned out to be exactly as tedious as it sounded. I spent most of my days in meetings, reading documents, answering queries from species who had just discovered Statute 7 and wanted to know what else the charter contained that no one had told them about. The answer was a lot. We were still finding things. The night before I left, Essel found me in the archive wing. The same long table where I had spent my 83 days. He sat 3 seats away, his version of acknowledgement. "The KTH lead advocate asked about you," he said. "He wanted to know if you were returning." "I am returning," I said. "To Earth. Not to the council." His fins moved, slow, deliberate. "You are leaving the door open." "I'm leaving it open," I agreed. "It's not my door to close." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to my seat, and extended his hand, a human gesture, learned, slightly awkward, but genuine. "Thank you," he said, "for reading everything." I shook his hand. "Thank you for not stopping me." He left. The archive wing hummed around me, preservation fields, environmental systems, the quiet machinery of 10,000 years of recorded history. I gathered my notes. There were fewer of them now. I had given most of them away. The transport departed at dawn, station time. I stood at the viewport and watched the hollowed moon recede, that beautiful, impossible room where I had learned that furniture could move, that doors existed in documents no one read, that 3 words could freeze a chamber full of ancient powers. Vess was on the transport with me. Her species had requested she return home for consultations. The Silurian Compact was drafting its own charter now, based on what she had found in the archives. She sat across from me, her silver face pale in the artificial light. "You're thinking about the ones still there," she said. "I'm thinking about the ones who will come after." She nodded. The delegate from the 3rd temporary seat, the one who spoke on the last day of the session. She asked me for notes. "All of them." "Did you give them to her?" "Every page." I looked out the viewport. The moon was a small circle now, no larger than a coin. Inside it, 41 species were still arguing, still negotiating, still arranging and rearranging their furniture. And somewhere in the back rows, a new delegate was reading the founding charter for the first time, finding the door, learning the 3 words. "Good," I said. The transport landed on Earth in the evening. The air was warm and smelled of rain. My mother was waiting at the gate, same as she had always been. Arms crossed, eyes sharp, already judging whether I had lost too much weight. "You're home," she said. "I'm home." She hugged me. It was not a diplomatic embrace. It was the kind of hug that did not care about protocols or charters or the weight of ancient institutions. I held on to her for a long time. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. "Jollof. And I don't want to hear about any space meetings." "No space meetings," I said. We walked out of the terminal together. The sky was darkening, the first stars appearing. Somewhere up there, the council chamber was still humming, the starlight falling through the thinned ceiling, the delegates still speaking, the back rows slowly filling with people who had finally been told about the door. But that was up there. Down here, there was jollof rice and a creaky floorboard and the sound of my mother's voice, asking if I had remembered to bring my good coat. I had not. She shook her head and made a sound that meant some things never change. She was right. Some things should not change. The door was open. The rest was up to the ones walking through it. The end.